It's enough to hijack the agenda of an EU summit, a supposed bomb threat, the pretext for forcing a Ryanair flight to land in Belarus, where authorities could then pluck an activist and independent journalist. What kind of a precedent does the scrambling of a military jet to force the commercial carrier to land send? What's Europe going to do about it? The crisis at the outset of a two-day summit in Brussels, and a reminder perhaps of recent slights for EU leaders on the world stage. Russia's dismissal of criticism when it sentenced Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, Sofagate in Turkey. It goes to the core, you might say, of the bloc's growing pains. Can 27 nations speak with one voice on matters like this? Well, definitely yes when it comes to things like trade and Brexit. Mostly yes when it comes to defining a common pandemic response. And as for foreign policy issues like this one, well, we'll be asking our panel today in the France 24 debate. What response from Europe on Belarus? Joining us, journalist Hanna Lyubakova, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, and who's joining us. And thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Hello, thank you.
From Warsaw, member of the European Parliament, Dominik Tarczynski from Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
He's Georgia's former Minister for European Integration, Tornika Gordadze, lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. How are you?
Good evening. I'm fine, and you?
And where it's all happening in Brussels, France 24's Dave Keating. How are things?
All right, I'm watching the leaders come in right now and kind of getting a sense of where the discussion might go tonight.
All right, we'll be asking you in a moment. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24 debate. First, though, let's go over some of the facts from Sunday. The death penalty awaits me here. That's what Roman Protasevich told fellow passengers as he was escorted along with his girlfriend off Ryanair flight FR 4978. According to the website Flight Tracker, the plane was nearly in Lithuanian airspace when a MiG-29 fighter jet escorted it to Minsk for an emergency landing. 7 hours later, it takes off again, this time, though, without the 26-year-old co-founder of the Telegram news channel Nexta, a go-to source during last year's post-electoral protests in Belarus.
5 minutes before arriving to Vilnius, captain of the flight said we have to land, emergency land, because potential bomb alert. Then we go out the plane, they have some dogs. For sure it wasn't true. The dog was more here to cover their excuse.
We were 8 hours there. We didn't get any information what happened.
They took the guy, the journalist, out from the plane, and then they started disembarking the passengers.
Hanna Lyubakova, it's shocked the whole world. Are you shocked by this? Was it something that you thought of, that you envisaged?
Well, it's very hard to envisage something like that, that the military, the jet fighter would come and escort the plane to kind of force it to land at the Minsk airport just to arrest the blogger. But I would say that last week actually has shown that Lukashenko is ready for the escalation and for escalation. And that's something that he would do. Last week, the largest media outlet in Belarus, Tutbay, was practically demolished. Its journalists were arrested. Its editor-in-chief remained in jail. There was another event. A political prisoner died in prison. His heart stopped. And basically, it's not clear what happened to him. So this is, how the last week ended. What we've seen in the past 9 months is that Lukashenko basically is not going to limit himself from, doing anything to stay in power. So that's another step, another development from his side to kind of show that he has no bounds at all.
And then there's also still questions about the passengers on that plane because Protasevich and his girlfriend were detained, but there were 3 other passengers who stayed on in Minsk. Let's listen to Ryanair's boss because he was asked whether they were in fact intelligence agents.
It was very frightening for the crew, for the passengers who were held under armed guard, had their bags searched. When it was clear, it appears, that the intent of the Russian authorities was to remove a journalist and his travelling companion. And, you know, we believe there was also some KGB agents offloaded off the aircraft as well.
So there were, your understanding is there were agents on board as well on that flight?
So.
So there he's referring to KGB agents. That would be, I presume, and I'll put it to you, Dominik Tarczynski, Belarus intelligence, since in Russia it's no longer called the KGB, it's the FSB. Your thoughts on those 3 other passengers?
It's not about names. It's still KGB. Mentally and practically, they are still KGB agents. KGB tells us much more than FSB, mainly for those who are not into the subject as much. So yes, KGB agents, as we know, Mr. Putin is a former KGB officer. So they are KGB agents, and they still practicing KGB history in the present days.
So hang on, you're saying Russia did this, not Belarus?
Important. Do you really believe that Lukashenko would do such a thing without approval from Kremlin? Of course not. He's just a satellite. He's a satellite country for Putin, and he does what he can do by approval from Kremlin. Everyone knows that. So we have to work on the language. First of all, if I may, the plane was not escorted. This plane was hijacked. The plane was hijacked, and we should use this kind of terms according to the reality. So this escalation is not an escalation only. We have to name it as it is. This is the act of terrorism, and we cannot tolerate this kind of behavior. So this is the moment. This is the moment for the European Union. This is the moment for our community to react, not only discuss it, not use a soft words, escalation, escorted. No, the plane was hijacked. This is the act of terrorism. It's up to us, up to the European Union. What are we going to do with Lukashenko, who is, as I said, as a country, as a dictator? We have to talk about him, not about the nation. He is a satellite soldier for KGB, former officer, Mr. Putin. Everyone knows it. I keep repeating it for the last 5 or 6 years that if Germany will still do the businesses with Mr. Putin while he is killing people, you know, about Litvinenko and others. Now we've got hijacked plane. If we will not take action, real action against him and also against satellite countries, they will do more and more.
Right, let me bring in on this, Tornika. Let me bring in Tornika because we're going to talk about what the EU's response should be. But let me first bring in Tornika Gordadze and ask you: do you think this is Lukashenko on his own, or doing Putin's bidding?
I think it's at least a joint venture, kind of joint operation, because when you look closely to the recent evolution of the situation in Belarus, Belarus became, after the rigged elections of 2020, much more dependent on Russia. Lukashenko put himself and his country entirely in the hands of Russia. Before that, it's quite interesting because for several years, Lukashenko tried sometimes desperately to establish some kind of relations with the West, with the European Union. But with these elections, he lost elections, and the only power in the world that supported these rigged elections and recognized him as a president was Putin. And
but hold on, Tornike, let me ask you this. At the outset, you heard Hannah describing how Lukashenko of late has been tightening the screws. He did so again this Monday by banning coverage by independent media of demonstrations. But Just last week, we had this lifting of U.S. sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Why would it be in Russia's interest to have this happen right now?
Oh, there are many reasons for that. First, for Russia, it's always great to have even more a pariah Belarus. Belarus will have no way back to the European Union, to the United States, and also in this context, Putin does not appear as the main player. We all guessed that he was behind of all this, but he can claim that it's Lukashenko, and he can use again Lukashenko over and over again to attack and to humiliate European Union and the West, because it's a huge slap in the face of the European Union. Can you imagine a flight from one European EU member capital to another EU member capital, NATO member capital to NATO member capital, was hijacked by the Belarusian state, and people on this flight were arrested. It's a huge humiliation for European Union, and for Russia, it's always good to have a weak and humiliated European Union. I think even if the European Union will react, and I hope they will react, and they will react strongly, any reaction, whatever will be the reaction of the European Union, it cannot be as strong as what Lukashenko just did, because Europe cannot send troops to Belarus. So there will be more sanctions.
Unfortunately, I have to agree.
All right, let me bring in Dave Keating now in Brussels. Dave, at this point in time, we heard remarks from the UK Foreign Secretary. The United Kingdom, in case you forgot, Dave, no longer a member of the European Union. And he was saying this couldn't have happened without the acquiescence of Russia. Have you been hearing any of that from some of the other leaders who've been arriving at this summit?
I didn't hear any leader specifically say that. We might have most expected that from Lithuanian President Nausėda. I mean, there were some strong words coming in. Nausėda said this was an act of state terrorism. Angela Merkel seemed to be leaning towards supporting the maximalist idea here of not just adopting new sanctions or speeding up the sanctions against Belarus, but also banning EU flights from flying over Belarus airspace and banning Belarus airlines from flying in EU airspace. And I have to say, as leaders were coming in, I heard several leaders strongly back this idea, and I didn't hear anyone explicitly ruling it out. I didn't even hear anyone calling for calm. So as leaders were coming in, I didn't hear specifically this idea about Russia, although Russia was, of course, brought up because this will be part of an already scheduled discussion about future EU-Russia relations. But for sure, it seemed that leaders were, I think, inclined toward action, inclined toward taking a big decision.
Hang on, Dave. Are you telling us here
watching those entries?
Are you telling us here there's consensus?
There might be for once when it comes to EU foreign policy. I mean, as you know, it is so difficult to get consensus decisions on foreign policy in the EU, and they are required. Foreign policy stances have to have unanimous approval of all 27 countries. But I did hear a lot of consensus coming in.
Dominic Tarczynski.
François, if I may. It's not about consensus. It's about common logic. The common logic for years was very simple. For everyone who cares about his nation, you cannot make a businesses with Putin, and then you cannot put at the same time sanctions on Putin for his actions. What about Nord Stream 2? We keep repeating, we keep shouting out loud that this is madness. And now, Madame Merkel, what she's going to say about Lufthansa stopped today in Belarus, how she's going to explain it. You cannot buy your dignity, and you cannot avoid humiliation from those with who you are making the businesses. Unfortunately, I have to agree, the humiliation is the act of pleasure for Putin against European Union. Why? Because he's making the business with those who call themselves leaders of the European Union. I mean, Germany, the biggest project of recent years, Nord Stream 2, is about to be done. It's about to be finished. Now Lufthansa is stopped in Minsk by Putin. Everyone knows that. Let me put it straight away. He had to agree for this action. So they are making the businesses together. They are humiliated by Putin, I mean Germany, and now they are looking for a consensus. This is madness. And
All right.
this madness
Let me bring in...
has to be stopped by those who respect their own people.
All right, let me bring in Hanna Lyubakova. It wasn't the most auspicious of build-ups to this European summit, with a tweet late Sunday by the EU Transport Commissioner, Adina Valian. She had tweeted, "The Ryanair flight took off just now from Minsk, bound for Vilnius. Great news for everyone, especially the families and friends of people on board." Of course, there was a strong reaction to that because it wasn't great news for everyone, was it? But Hannah, let me ask you, what are people expecting from the European Union? Belarus citizens, what are they expecting?
Well, Belarusian citizens are definitely expecting more tangible steps and strong response. They feel, they understand, and they expect more when it comes to sanctions, when it comes to punitive measures, when it comes to punishment. Lukashenko has not been punished yet, and that's something that the people of Belarus want the Western countries to help with. I mean, since we're speaking about sanctions, they should be indeed more painful for the regime. And the EU should reconsider its, the list, the packages that it has accepted in kind of broadened sanctions. Then we have international investigations. The people expect that there would be that the case of the plane and what happened would be investigated. What happened and how pilots were treated by what they were told by the air traffic in forces in Belarus. Western countries should also send a clear signal to the Belarusian regime that it is isolated. It should be isolated. Since the EU did not recognize the election results, there should be another call for a new free and fair presidential election, and obviously negotiations that should start as soon as possible between the democratic forces and the representatives of the regime. And obviously, yeah, sure.
No, go ahead. You finish your point.
If I may, to put it straight away.
Let me just let Hanna Lyubakova finish, please. Go ahead.
And I would consider important, so we were talking about investigation, we were talking about justice, we were talking about sanctions, punishment, right? And then we have assistance. So assistance to civil society, to people, to the victims of repressions, to media, and kind of this, I would say, well, some people call it the Marshall Plan, something that would give hope to Belarusians and would show them that, Belarus would have the future. So these are kind of steps and these pillars that are important for the people.
And we need to be spelled out. We're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we are wondering about the EU response as a summit gets underway to the diversion of that Ryanair jet that took place over the weekend. It was bound for Vilnius from Greece and diverted to Minsk. With us, Belarusian journalist Hanna Lyubakova, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Joining us from Warsaw, member of the European Parliament, Dominik Tarczynski from Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party. Tornike Gordadze is a lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and France 24's Brussels correspondent Dave Keating, following that summit for us in the Belgian capital. Back in 2013, we remember the plane carrying Bolivia's Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, coming back from Moscow, forced to land in Vienna after Spain, France, Portugal, and Italy closed their airspace. There were accusations it was part of moves to make sure that U.S. whistleblower Edward Snowden was not on board. Tornike Gordadze, a fighter jet is a different matter in this case. and bringing down this commercial aircraft, is it going to change, you think, the way or the rules when it comes to international travel?
It's a very bad precedent, and it's very dangerous precedent because, as you know, the Belarus is not the only authoritarian state that surrounds European Union. There are some other undemocratic and authoritarian states, and first of all, Russia. That's why I think the European Union should react very, very strongly. It's not only about increasing sanctions on some individuals, etc. European Union and the West as a whole, because I think here the solidarity, transatlantic solidarity, is very important. Plus the solidarity of all democratic countries everywhere. I mean, including in Asia, other continents, should make Belarus and Russia understand that this is something unacceptable, because it will be first a huge humiliation, and second, it would create a precedent, and many other dictatorships would be tempted by this kind of behavior. And believe me, there are many who are really now watching with great interest what will be the reaction of the West, of the European Union and the United States, because it's all about the credibility and the power of the democracies to defend themselves and to defend the rules that have been established since the decade.
Dave Keating, the European Union has right now some catching up to do. We all recall back in February, its foreign policy chief happens to be in Moscow on the day when Alexei Navalny gets a long sentence, and it was the general feeling that the EU-27 got egg on their face over that visit. In this particular case, is that high on leaders' minds?
I think so. Look, the EU has made a whole bunch of foreign policy missteps lately, and that visit to Moscow by Borrell was just one of them. I mean, just last week you saw that the EU was unable to come to a united statement about the Israel-Palestine conflict happening at the moment to the United Nations because Hungary vetoed a unified statement. And we know that in the autumn, when they were first adopting the sanctions against Belarus for what they say was a fraudulent election and the crackdown on the protests after the election, we saw Cyprus vetoing those sanctions until the EU agreed to put some sanctions on Turkey in an unrelated matter. But foreign policy, as I said before, it's a very difficult subject for the EU because of this need for unanimity in the Council, which is something many people have proposed needs to be ended. But I think certainly EU leaders during tonight's meeting will know that in order to have credibility here, after the very, very drastic statements that they made yesterday and just today, right now, as they're entering the summit, they have to back that up with some actions. I do think that their statements coming in show that they realize that the need for firm action is great if the EU is going to maintain any credibility here.
And Germany in particular is, of course, going to be looked on. We heard strong words from Angela Merkel, but beyond those strong words, what more can we expect?
Germany is an interesting question because it is one of the countries that likes to take a more pacifist approach toward Russia, a more cautious approach. There are other countries in that camp, usually Italy is usually in that camp. Interestingly, Greece often finds itself in that camp. They have cultural, religious ties with Russia, but actually the Greeks are, I'm being told, pushing the hardest for the maximalist response here tonight. That is, of course, partly because this flight was coming from Greece. But Greece has, I think it varies, but oftentimes Greece is seen as an ally of Russia, or at least a more cautious voice for Russia sanctions within the Council. We are not seeing that tonight. So I think that the impetus here is really toward action, even from the countries that are normally more cautious about this.
So we could get unanimity this time around. Dominic Tarczynski, when you heard there Dave Keating roll off the list of recent examples where unanimity was impossible, is that something to think about going forward, that perhaps the EU needs some kind of a different kind of system so that EU foreign policy decisions can be made?
No one really cares when Germany is making the businesses. When we alarmed, when we urge, when we tried to discuss Nord Stream 2, no one ever listened. Germany just making the business with Putin as always. Business as always. The same thing with vaccination. When there was a problem with the vaccine, Angela Merkel just called Putin. So if you want to get into the heart of the problem, we have to talk about Mr. Putin, his satellite dictators like Lukashenko, and Madame Merkel, who called themselves a leader of the European Union. These two figures, Putin and Merkel, are responsible for what the whole Europe and this part of the world are experiencing at the moment. If Madame Merkel will not stop the businesses, if she will not stop Nord Stream 2, Putin will keep his economy, will keep his army fed, he will keep his satellites, dictators happy. Madame Merkel, she gave him an oxygen. The Russian economy, it's not booming. It's not doing great for years.
Well, on that score, then, Dominic, on that score, what do you make of last week, the United States then lifting the sanctions on stopping Nord Stream 2, effectively letting it go forward?
This is what I've said. Me, as a supporter for Mr. Trump, I love Mr. Trump, and I hope he's going to be back. This is what I said years ago when Mr. Trump was in office. If President Biden will win, then the Nord Stream 2 will be continued. I am very disappointed. It's a very bad decision. It's a decision which will cost a lot of money and safety all Europe, not only European Union, but whole Europe as a continent. And I hope his administration will change his mind in some point. It's just a bad decision for Europe. It's not only my opinion. Everyone who is aware of Nord Stream 2 would say the same thing. Sanctions, and action. Stop Nord Stream 2 now, Madam Merkel.
All right, Torniko Gordadze, do you agree that if you scratch the veneer of the EU 27, you get the transactional relationship between Moscow and Berlin?
I think that we can regret the fact that at the end of the day, we see this project of Nord Stream 2 coming to the end, or at least the sanctions and all the objections that were put by the Americans, by other countries, were lifted. This is a very bad news. And of course, if some people believe in Europe that will appease Putin and it will make him more, more cooperative with the European, it's a mistake, because Vladimir Putin considers European Union as an enemy. It's in his objective to destroy the European Union. That's why he's supporting all the anti-European forces everywhere. He's the person who doesn't want to have a strong Europe, strong transatlantic links. He's against NATO. So it's a kind of it's very important geopolitical goal for him, and not the Nord Stream and some these kind of agreements or small agreements will not change his mind. And he's using, now we see that he's not attacking directly. He's using Mr. Lukashenko, who became entirely under his influence. Before that, Lukashenko tried to play his own game. We remember that a year ago he was only a year ago. He arrested several dozens of Wagner fighters. He also he was supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, and he invited Mr. Pompeo was there just a year ago, and he met Mr. Pompeo. He also hosted several international conferences with NATO officials. So he was, but this is over now, and now he's entirely under Putin's hands, and Putin will use him again and again to make nasty things to the Europeans, and this is the unfortunately the truth now. That's why the West have to not only sanction Lukashenko and also make Russia understand that we know that Russia is behind all this, but also to help Belarusian people and to be more positive when it comes to the Belarusian people. These people
let's talk about the Belarusian people now.
Yeah, just they voted 80% against Lukashenko because and these people are not for Lukashenko. They want him to leave the power.
Let's talk about Belarusians. Let's talk about Belarusians now. Yeah. This Monday, we had authorities in Minsk announcing they'll be banning independent journalists from covering protests, as well as the publication of independent polls. It's been a steadily increasing crackdown. Mixed fortunes for the most high-profile activists from last August's movement, as Vedika Bahel reports.
Only 18 years old, and with only a Bible, a water bottle and a packet of cigarettes in his luggage. This Belarusian has just illegally crossed the border with Lithuania, all on foot.
Облегчение колоссальное, потому что, я ушел от всего того ужаса, который происходил.
Lithuania has already granted hundreds of humanitarian visas to Belarusian nationals. For ordinary citizens desperate to flee the regime, as well as political opponents taking a stance against the government. The opposition journalist Roman Protasevich was also on his way to the Baltic states before the forced diversion of his plane on Sunday. It's also the new home of the leader of the pro-democracy movement, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who fled for the sake of her children's safety last year. The three countries welcoming Belarusian opponents are its neighbours, Poland, Lithuania and Ukraine, which has created some strained ties with Belarus. Stjepan Putsila now works out of exile in Poland. He founded Nectar, an encrypted opposition media on the Telegram messaging app, where he worked with Roman Protasevich. Political activist Veronika Tsepkalo is reported to be in Ukraine after government pressure when she represented her husband's election campaign. Others, like the former minister Pavel Latushko, who spoke out in support of the opposition, prefer to not reveal an exact location. Last summer, Belarus was gripped by months of unprecedented anti-government protests. They erupted after an election believed to have been rigged in favour of incumbent President Alexander Lukashenko, who's been in power since 1994. The disbelief and anger spilled into the streets, and violent clashes saw thousands of protesters arrested. More than 400 of them have been sentenced to several years in prison.
Hanna Lubakova, right now, with the developments we've been talking about throughout this show and what we've seen in that report just now, how does the opposition organize itself?
As it was mentioned, there are people who are based in Warsaw, in Vilnius, in Riga, in Kiev, in kind of neighboring countries with Belarus, because many of them were forced to leave. There are people inside the country who try to kind of remain anonymous, who went on the underground in a way, and there are still activities that they've been doing, but they just do not publicize those. And all these people communicate with each other. So the leaders of democratic movement who are based abroad and those people inside the country, there are kind of calls between them. And there is still kind of connection going on here between people in Belarus and outside. So I wouldn't say that there is a problem between kind of communication, right, between those people. It's obviously hard, right now because of all these threats and what Lukashenko has shown that, he would not restrain himself from detaining, from arresting his opponents, even kind of going abroad, kind of going out of the territory of Belarus. So that might kind of provoke some, I would say, additional level of fear among those people who are based abroad. But otherwise, it's still kind of functioning, and I would say that the position has been more united than ever for throughout all these months.
And what about you personally? How does it make you feel?
Well, firstly, I'm very surprised by the people's resilience inside the country. They are scared, really scared, and they're angry, they're tired by what is happening. But when I see that they still kind of protest, they still try to show that they are against, they have not agreed with the status quo and they want Lukashenko to go, it gives me a lot of strength as well. It motivates me, it encourages me. And we cannot give up. My friends are in prison. Roman Protasevich is my friend. So I just, we've been working as much as we can to change the situation, to do what we can to bring about change in the country.
What's interesting about Roman Protasevich is he was the co-founder of a very popular Telegram channel and was working on another one right now. The fact that it is these social media channels that are the venue for information, that are, the new media for citizens in Belarus, does it make it impossible to keep the news out?
It's definitely much harder because of all these repressions against journalists and bloggers in Belarus, and those repressions have started months before the elections. There were already arrests of bloggers before the actual election campaign. And yes, definitely there is fear among journalists. We are prevented from doing our job. Journalists, have been arrested basically on literally a weekly basis. In the country, many were sent to prison, so it all kind of creates this really, bad atmosphere, I would say. But at the same time, there is this really kind of nice collaboration in a way between citizens and journalists. They send us information about what's happening. They share it. They go and record, film what they see so that we can report on the events, because they know that we cannot be there. We cannot be on site and report because we can be detained. So they are trying to do what they can. And Telegram has become extremely important as a platform for communication between people. And that's something that I kind of keep mentioning. But before, people were not so united. People were not able to communicate. And what Telegram did, it actually gave them this platform, basically, this kind of place where they can share ideas, unite, mobilize, self-organize. And that's why this democratic movement, this revolution is more successful than any of the previous protests. And obviously another reason is that people are definitely fed up with Alexander Lukashenko more than ever before.
All right, one final question. I'll put it to you, Dave Keating. Right now, this two-day summit getting underway in Brussels. We mentioned earlier how the EU is under pressure to do more on foreign policy. Your thoughts on, again, with all that's going on right now and how much the world is changing, whether EU's foreign policy remit could evolve?
I think it could evolve for sure, because we're hearing increasing voices saying the status quo right now is just not acceptable. These national politicians who don't want to surrender more power over to Brussels in the field of foreign policy, who want to maintain their national vetoes, can't then at the same time criticize the EU for not having strong foreign policy stances. You have to pick one or the other. Either you accept that some sovereignty will go to the level of Brussels so that the EU can be united in its response when things like this happen, or you accept the fact that the EU cannot be strong if national governments can maintain a veto.
Dominic Tarczynski?
If I may. Okay, let's make it clear. It's not about giving away any powers or any decision process to the European Union. We don't want European Union to do something for us instead of us because we are European Union. But it's very hard to take an action against Putin when you're making a multi-billionaire of himself, of Putin, of his soldiers, of his satellite dictators. We are talking about Nord Stream 2 as a best example, but there is much more to be given. So it's not about expectations
But
from Poland, for
the
example.
charge that's
We don't
leveled,
want
the charge that's
European
leveled,
Union
Dominic,
to
is
do something for us.
the charge that's leveled is in that case you can't cherry pick. You can on one issue say we want the EU to be strong, and on others say let us be.
No, to be strong and to be united for the European Union, which means an example which I've been given for many years. Let's go for a lunch. Let's split the bill, but we're gonna drink the same thing. But Germany wants to drink Dom Perignon, and they want us to drink water.
Okay.
This is not unity. This is not a unity. This is not a solidarity. They want to make businesses and make money with Putin. They're making him strong. And then on the next day, they are crying that he is such a bad person. And then they are crying
Dominic,
about the
unfortunately,
who are
we're out of
around
time.
him. They are hypocrites. They are a bunch of hypocrites. And
Next
that is
time-
the problem.
next-
The main problem of the European Union is hypocrisy. And until hypocrisy will not be stopped,
Dominic
the problems
Tarczynski,
will not be solved.
I want to thank you. Next time we'll bring a German guest along so that you could tell him directly. I want to thank you so much for joining us from
There is
Warsaw.
much more to be discussed.
All right, there is indeed. Hanna Lyobakova, I want to thank you for being with us. Tonike Gordadze and our France 24 correspondent Dave Keating following that summit in Brussels. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.